Act 1. The call that shattered everything. I was arranging white lilies in my kitchen, their petals soft as whispers. A ritual of hope for my son, Blaine. He'd loved lilies since he was a boy, and I'd bought these to bring to him at the hospital, where the doctors assured me he was stable after his surgery. My heart was heavy, but I clung to the belief that there was time to see his smile, to hold his hand, to tell him I loved him one more time. Then the phone rang, slicing through the quiet like a blade. I answered, expecting an update, perhaps even good news. Hello? Oh, Paul. It was Nola, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reciting a grocery list. I'm calling about the funeral arrangements. The world stopped. The lily in my hand slipped to the linoleum floor, its stem snapping under my fingers. Funeral? What funeral? My voice trembled, barely a whisper. The doctor said Blaine was... When did you last speak to a doctor, Opal? Nola's tone was sharp, impatient, as if I were a child asking foolish questions. Yesterday morning, I stammered, my mind racing to grasp her words. Dr. Henderson said the surgery went well, that Blaine was resting. That was 2 days ago. Her words fell like a guillotine, severing hope. Blaine died yesterday evening, complications from an infection. The kitchen spun around me. I gripped the counter, my knuckles whitening, the edge biting into my palm. No, that's not possible. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't someone... I tried calling, she said, her voice devoid of warmth, of the grief you'd expect from a widow. You didn't answer. I grabbed my phone, scrolling frantically through missed calls, my fingers clumsy with panic. Nothing. No calls from Nola, no calls from the hospital. My phone had been my lifeline, always on, always by my side, waiting for news about my boy. There are no missed calls from you, I whispered, my voice breaking. Well, maybe your phone was off. Doesn't matter now. I heard her moving, probably sorting papers or packing. She was always organizing, always in control, a puppeteer pulling invisible strings. The point is, I need to know what time works for you for the funeral. We're thinking Thursday at 2. Thursday? It was Tuesday evening. That's too soon. Don't we need time to plan, to notify people? It's planned already. Small ceremony. Immediate family only. Pastor Williams from my church will officiate. Her church? Not ours. Not the church where Blaine was baptized, where he sang in the children's choir every Sunday until he was 12, his voice ringing clear and bright. Her church, where I'd never been invited, never welcome. Nola, please, I pleaded, my voice cracking with desperation. Can we talk about this? Blaine was my son, my only child. I need to be part of... I've been thinking, she interrupted, her voice colder if that was possible, and honestly, it might be better if you didn't come. Her words hit like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled back, my hip bumping the kitchen table, dishes rattling. What did you just say? You heard me. It would be too emotional, too complicated. Blaine wouldn't have wanted a scene at his funeral. A scene. As if a mother, grieving her only child, was an inconvenience, a disruption to her meticulously staged event. Nola, you can't be serious. He's my son, my only child. He was my husband, she snapped, her voice dripping with accusation. And frankly, Opal, where have you been the last 5 years? You barely called, barely visited. Don't pretend you were close to him now. Her words were knives, slicing through me with just enough truth to draw blood. I hadn't called as much as I should have. I hadn't visited as often as I wanted. But every time I tried, there was a reason, a conflict, an excuse, always orchestrated by Nola. I tried, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Every time I planned to visit, something came up. You said he was too tired, or you had plans, or... Exactly. You tried. That's not the same as being there. Her tone was venomous, twisting my efforts into failure, rewriting my love as neglect. I thought of the birthdays when my calls went unanswered, the Christmas invitations withdrawn at the last minute, the grandchildren I'd never met because Nola said it would be too confusing for them to have multiple grandmother figures. Wait, grandchildren? I said suddenly, grasping at a memory that felt like a lifeline. The kids? Nola's voice shifted, genuinely confused. What children? Blaine told me 2 years ago you were expecting. Last year he said the baby was walking, that... She laughed, a cold, bitter sound that chilled my blood to ice. Opal, we never had children. I don't know what Blaine told you, but we decided against kids years ago. My career, his health issues. We were happy just the two of us. The lies. The elaborate stories Blaine had spun about his children. The photos he'd shown me. Borrowed from someone else's life, I realized now, with a sickening lurch. Why would he lie about something so fundamental, so precious? My mind reeled, struggling to piece together a puzzle with missing edges. I don't understand, I murmured, my voice barely audible. Look, Opal, I don't have time for this right now. I have a funeral to finalize. The service is Thursday at 2 at Peterson's funeral home on Maple Street. If you insist on coming, fine, but keep it together, okay? This isn't about you. She hung up before I could respond, the line going dead with a finality that echoed in my chest. I stood frozen, holding the silent phone, staring at the broken lily on the floor. My son was gone, and I'd learned about it like it was an administrative task Nola had to check off her list. A minor inconvenience in her perfectly controlled world. The music shifts to a tense, minor key melody, strings vibrating with suspense, building an air of unease. Desperate for something solid to hold on to, I called the hospital, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. St. Mary's, how can I help you? I'm calling about my son, Blaine Morrison. He was a patient there, and I was told, let me transfer you to patient information. Cheerful hold music blared, its upbeat tempo mocking the chaos of my grief, grating against the storm in my heart. Finally, a voice came on the line, clinical and detached. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we don't have any record of a Blaine Morrison being a patient here in the last 6 months. That can't be right, I said, my voice rising with panic. He had surgery 2 days ago. Dr. Henderson was his surgeon. We don't have a Dr. Henderson on staff, ma'am. Are you sure you have the right hospital? I hung up, my mind spinning into a vortex of confusion. What hospital had Blaine been in? Had I assumed St. Mary's? Had he told me? Or had I filled in the blanks myself, piecing together fragments of hope? The conversations with him over the past weeks blurred together, distorted by grief and doubt. I called Peterson's funeral home next, clinging to the hope of confirming something, anything, real. Peterson Funeral Home, this is Margaret speaking. Hi, I'm calling about the service for Blaine Morrison on Thursday. Oh yes, Mrs. Morrison. Everything is arranged as you requested. Closed casket, small service, immediate family only. Will you be bringing the flowers or should we handle the arrangements? I'm not Mrs. Morrison, I said slowly, my voice shaking with a mix of dread and anger. I'm Opal Morrison, Blaine's mother. Silence stretched on the other end, thick and heavy. Then, oh my, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Morrison. Your daughter-in-law specifically said the guest list was finalized and no additional family members would be attending. She said it would be too difficult for you, that you preferred to grieve privately. She said I wasn't coming. My voice was a whisper, barely holding together, as if speaking louder would make the betrayal more real. Yes, I'm terribly sorry for the confusion. The service is, well, actually, there's been a change. Mrs. Morrison called an hour ago and moved it to tomorrow at 10 a.m. She said she wanted to get it over with quickly for everyone's sake. Tomorrow, less than 12 hours from now, my son's funeral moved without a word to me, as if my presence was an afterthought, or worse, an obstacle. I hung up and sank into my kitchen chair, staring at the lily on the floor, its petals bruised and wilting. In the morning, while I was likely sipping coffee or skimming the newspaper, my only child would be buried, and his wife, the woman who'd systematically erased me from his life, would be the only one there to say goodbye. A chilling realization washed over me, cold as the grave itself. Maybe this was exactly what Nola had planned all along. Maybe my son's death was the final act in a performance designed to shut me out forever. Act 2. The slow erasure of a mother. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, when my son was gone, and I didn't even know where his body rested? Instead, I sat in Blaine's old bedroom, surrounded by the relics of a life we'd shared before Nola entered it. His baseball trophies gleamed faintly in the moonlight, still proudly displayed on the shelves. His college diploma hung crooked on the wall, a testament to his ambitions and my sacrifices. Double shifts at the diner to pay his tuition. Photos lined the room, each a snapshot of a time when we were inseparable. Blaine at 6, grinning with a missing tooth after hitting his first home run. At 16, holding his first car keys, laughing as I fretted over his driving. At 26, radiant beside Nola on their wedding day, his smile wide, but his eyes holding a hint of uncertainty I'd missed back then. When had I lost him? It wasn't a single moment, a clean break I could pinpoint. It was like watching someone fade in slow motion, their colors dimming so gradually you don't notice until they're a shadow of themselves. I picked up the wedding photo, my fingers tracing Blaine's face. Nola's arm around his waist felt possessive. Even in the frozen image, her smile triumphant. That day, I'd felt the first sting of being an outsider in my son's life, a subtle shift I hadn't understood until now. 3 days before the wedding, he'd called, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mom, I need to talk about the seating arrangements. Nola thinks it might be better if you sat in the second row." The second row? I'd tried to keep my voice light, swallowing the hurt that bloomed in my chest. "Honey, I'm the mother of the groom." I know, it's just Nola's family is bigger and her grandmother needs the front row for her wheelchair. Of course, I'd said, forcing a smile he couldn't see, not wanting to be the difficult mother-in-law before I even became one. Whatever makes Nola happy. But it stung, a small wound that never healed. Looking back, it was the first of many concessions, each one carving away a piece of my place in Blaine's life until I was left with nothing but echoes. I pulled out my old calendar from the year after their marriage, its pages a chronicle of rejection, each entry a wound I hadn't recognized at the time. March 15th. Visit Blaine. Cancelled. Nola has flu. April 22nd. Easter dinner. Moved to Nola's parents' house. June 3rd. Blaine's birthday. We'll celebrate next week. We never did. August 17th. Weekend visit. Nola's sister visiting. Maybe next month. The pattern was glaring now, a roadmap of exclusion I'd been too trusting to see. Every plan thwarted, every connection severed, always with a plausible excuse. Nola's reasons were always polite, always reasonable, delivered with a sweetness that masked their poison. "I'm so sorry, Opal," she'd say, her voice dripping with honey over the phone. "Blaine's exhausted from work. You know how hard he's been pushing for that promotion. Maybe when things calm down." Or, "Oh, I wish you'd called yesterday. We just made plans with my college friends. Maybe next weekend." My favorite. The one that cut deepest. "Blaine's been overwhelmed lately. The doctor said he needs to reduce stress. Family visits can be so draining, can't they?" Family visits. As if seeing his mother, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father walked out when he was 8, was a burden instead of a joy. I scrolled through years of text messages with Blaine, the change subtle but unmistakable, like a tide pulling him away. 3 years ago. "Love you, Mom. Can't wait to see you Sunday." 2 years ago. "Hey, Mom, something came up. Can we reschedule?" Last year. "I'll call you later this week." The messages grew shorter, colder, more distant, as if I were an acquaintance rather than his mother. But occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of the son I knew, moments when his warmth broke through the fog Nola had woven around us. 6 months ago, he'd called out of the blue on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice catching me off guard. "Mom, are you busy?" "Never too busy for you, honey. What's wrong?" I heard strain in his voice, a sadness I couldn't place, a longing that mirrored my own. "Nothing's wrong. I was just thinking about when I was 12 and got pneumonia. You slept in that chair next to my hospital bed for 3 nights straight, even though it was so uncomfortable." "Of course I remember," I said, my heart swelling with the memory. "You were so sick, sweetheart. I wasn't leaving you alone." "The nurses kept telling you to go home, to get some real sleep, but you wouldn't budge. Why are you thinking about that, Blaine?" A long pause stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. "No reason," he said finally. "I've been remembering things lately. Good things." I heard Nola's voice in the background, sharp and intrusive. "Who are you talking to? I thought we were starting dinner." He said quickly, "I should go, Mom. Nola's making her famous lasagna tonight." "Okay, sweetheart. I love you. Love you, too." It was the last time he said those words, the last time he called just to talk, just to reach across the distance Nola had built between us. The music shifts to a haunting, reflective melody, strings trembling with suspense, evoking a sense of unraveling. I thought about the warning signs I'd ignored, the moments I'd brushed off as misunderstandings, like the time I drove 3 hours with Blaine's favorite chocolate cake for his birthday, the one I'd made every year since he was 4, its rich scent filling my car with memories of his laughter. Nola answered the door, her face cycling through surprise, annoyance, then a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Opal? What a surprise! We weren't expecting you." "I know, I should have called," I said, holding the cake like an offering. "It's Blaine's birthday, and I wanted to bring his cake." "Oh, how thoughtful. But we're just leaving for dinner with my family. My mother made reservations at that new steakhouse downtown." "I could come with you," I offered, clinging to hope. "I'd love to meet your parents properly." "Oh, I don't think there's room. It's a small table. You know how restaurants are." She took the cake from my hands, her grip firm. "I'm sure Blaine will love this." Through the doorway, I saw Blaine putting on his jacket. He looked up, his expression one of confusion, maybe even irritation. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I brought your birthday cake," I said weakly, my voice faltering under his gaze. He walked over, giving me a quick, awkward hug that felt more like an obligation than affection. You didn't need to drive all this way. We could have celebrated this weekend. But we didn't. The cake sat in their fridge until it went stale, and I never learned if Blaine had a single slice. Now, sitting in my kitchen at 3 a.m., the coffee brewing with a soft gurgle, I realized Nola hadn't just made excuses. She'd trained Blaine to see me as an inconvenience, a relic from a past she wanted to erase. Every canceled visit, every maybe next time, had taught him his mother was someone to manage, not cherish. And I'd let it happen, so terrified of being the overbearing mother-in-law that I'd accepted every boundary, every limitation, every lie. I poured the coffee, its bitter scent grounding me in the quiet dark. I couldn't let Nola bury my son without me there, couldn't let her write the final chapter of his story. But something deep in my bones told me her panicked call was coming soon, a crack in her carefully constructed facade. When it did, I'd be ready, not with tears, but with questions that would peel back the layers of her deceit. Act 3. The truth beneath the surface. 7 days. That's how long I'd carried the crushing weight of not knowing where my son was buried, a mother's heart tethered to a void. 7 days of calling funeral homes, cemeteries, anyone who might hold a piece of the puzzle. My voice hoarse from pleading, my hope fraying with each dead end. I was at my kitchen table, staring at a list of cemeteries I'd called twice, their names blurring through tears, when the phone rang, making me jump as if it were a gunshot. "What the hell are you doing to my life?" Nola's voice exploded through the phone, loud and frantic, a far cry from the composed, icy woman who dismissed my grief like an inconvenience. This was someone unraveling, her control slipping through her fingers like sand. "Nola, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Don't play dumb, Opal. I know what you're doing. The lawyers, the questions, the investigation. Just stop it." "What lawyers? What investigation?" I sat up straighter, my heart pounding as a new piece of the puzzle snapped into place. "The probate lawyer called this morning," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "There's an issue with Blaine's will. They want me to come in tomorrow with documentation about our marriage, our finances, everything. You're behind this, aren't you? A will. Blaine had a will, and somehow I was entangled in it. The thought hadn't crossed my mind. I'd been consumed with finding his grave, with reclaiming the right to say goodbye. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," I said carefully, probing for cracks in her story. "Stop lying." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, I heard raw fear. "You must have contacted them, contested something, claimed something, I don't know." "Nola, I haven't contacted any lawyers," I said, my voice firm. "I've been trying to find out where you buried my son, and you won't even tell me that much." Silence hung heavy on the line, a pause that felt like the calm before a storm. Then, quietly, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Riverside Cemetery, Section C, Plot 247. I scribbled it down, my hands shaking so badly the pen skittered across the page. "Thank you," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Don't thank me yet." Her voice regained its hard edge, but it wavered, betraying her fear. "Look, Opal, we need to talk in person. There are things about Blaine, things you don't understand." "What things?" I pressed, my curiosity sharpening like a blade. "Not over the phone. Can you come over today?" I glanced at the address. Riverside Cemetery, Section C, Plot 247. After 7 days of searching, of waking each morning with a scream trapped in my chest, I could finally visit my son, kneel at his grave, and speak the words I'd never had the chance to say. But Nola's panic intrigued me, a loose thread in her carefully woven tapestry of control. What had shaken her so badly? What truth was she desperate to contain? "I'll come after I visit the cemetery," I said, testing her. "No!" Her voice was sharp, desperate, a plea masquerading as a command. "Before. Come here first, please, Opal. It's important." There was vulnerability in her tone, a crack in her armor I'd never heard before. After years of being shut out, of being relegated to the margins of my son's life, she needed me. The irony was a bitter pill, but it fueled my resolve. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, hanging up before she could respond. The sound of a car engine starting rumbles, then fades into a suspenseful, pulsing melody, evoking a journey into the unknown. Nola's house looked unchanged from the outside, neat, suburban, the picture of domestic bliss, the place where my son had lived and died without me knowing. But Nola was a shadow of the woman I'd known. Her usually perfect hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, strands escaping like frayed nerves. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Her clothes were wrinkled, as if she'd slept in them, or hadn't slept at all. "Come in," she said, stepping aside, her voice brittle. "Do you want coffee? I just made some." The politeness felt forced, a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of control. I followed her to the kitchen, where legal documents cluttered the counters like the debris of a shipwreck, pages spilling over as if her life were unraveling in ink and paper. "Nola, what's going on?" I asked, my voice calm but unyielding. She poured coffee, her hands trembling slightly, the pot clinking against the mugs. "The lawyer said Blaine changed his will 3 months ago," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. 3 months, Opal. Right around the time he—" She trailed off, staring into her coffee cup as if it held the answers she feared. "Around the time he what?" I pressed, leaning forward, my eyes locked on hers. "Around the time he started asking about you," she said, her voice breaking. "Why you never visited, why you never called anymore." She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I told him you'd gotten busy with your own life, that you didn't really want to be bothered with us anymore." The lie hung between us like a physical thing, heavy and toxic. Anger surged in my chest, hot and fierce, but something in her expression, guilt, perhaps, or shame, held me back. "But apparently," she continued, her voice steadier now, "he didn't believe me. The lawyer said Blaine hired a private investigator." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips, the warmth of the ceramic suddenly foreign against my skin. "A what?" "A private investigator," she repeated, her words slow, as if saying them made them more real. "To find out why you'd stopped trying to have a relationship with him." "And what did this investigator find?" I asked, my voice low, a quiet demand for the truth. Her face crumpled, tears spilling over as her composure shattered. "Phone records," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Documentation of every plan I canceled, every excuse I made to keep you away. Text messages I sent from Blaine's phone when he was at work, telling you he was too busy to see you. Emails I intercepted and deleted before he could see them." The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in as her words rewrote years of my life. "You sent messages pretending to be Blaine?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and rage. "Only a few times," she said quickly, as if that softened the betrayal. When I knew he was overwhelmed, when seeing you would have been stressful for him, I was protecting him. Protecting him, I repeated, my voice rising, sharp enough to cut. From his own mother? You don't understand, she said, her voice climbing, desperate now. When we first got married, you were all he talked about. Mom this, mom that. Every decision had to be run past you. Every plan had to include you. I felt like I was married to both of you, like I was always second place in his heart. So you decided to fix that by lying to us both, I said, my words laced with venom, each one a barb aimed at the heart of her deceit. I thought you'd both be happier with distance, she said, her voice breaking again. I thought Blaine would focus more on our marriage, on building a life with me, and I thought you'd find your own life, your own interests, without clinging to him. She looked down at her hands, twisting the coffee mug as if it could anchor her. For a while it worked. Blaine stopped mentioning you so much. We had a good marriage, Opal. We were happy, until 3 months ago. What changed? I asked, my voice softer now, curiosity tempering my anger. Something shifted, she said, her eyes distant, as if reliving those months. He started bringing you up again, asking why you never called anymore, why you seemed so distant. I kept telling him you were fine, that you told me you were happy, we were giving you space, but he didn't believe me. He said you used to call him every week, remember every birthday, every anniversary, every small thing that mattered to him. He said, that wasn't like you. Tears stung my eyes, a mix of grief and pride. My son had known somehow that something was wrong, that the distance between us wasn't my choice. So he hired an investigator, I said, my voice steady despite the tears. Yes, she said, nodding miserably. And what they found? She gestured helplessly at the papers scattered across the counter, a chaotic testament to her unraveling life. It was enough to make him change his will. The lawyer said he left everything to you, Opal. The house, his savings, his life insurance, everything. I felt like I'd been struck. The air knocked from my lungs. Everything, I whispered, struggling to comprehend the weight of her words. There's a letter, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. The lawyer has it. I don't know what it says, but... She looked up, and I saw real fear in her eyes, raw and unguarded. I think he found out everything I did. I think he was planning to leave me. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, its normalcy jarring against the chaos of our conversation. The investigator's report, Nola said finally, her voice trembling. It said there was clear evidence that your relationship with Blaine had been sabotaged by a third party. By me. She turned to the window, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I never meant for it to go this far, Opal, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant to keep you from him completely. I wanted to be first in his life for once. And now he's gone, and I've lost everything that matters. Maybe he had known. Maybe in those final months, my son had seen through the intricate web of lies his wife had spun around us. Maybe he'd been planning to come home to me, to rebuild the bond we'd lost. But I'd never know for sure. That opportunity had died with him, buried in a grave I hadn't even been allowed to visit. I need to see that lawyer, I said, standing, my voice firm despite the storm raging inside me. And I need to read whatever letter Blaine left. Nola nodded, her face a mask of misery. His name is David Hartwell. His office is on Main Street. He's expecting you tomorrow at 10. As I walked toward the door, she called after me, her voice small and desperate. Opal, what are you going to do about the house? I mean, about everything. I turned back, meeting her gaze, seeing the woman who'd robbed me of years with my son, who'd twisted love into control until it broke us all. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I'm going to find out exactly what my son wanted me to know. Act 4, The Grave and the Letter. Riverside Cemetery was a haven of silence, save for the wind whispering through the ancient oaks, their branches swaying like mourners. Section C, Plot 247. A simple granite headstone stood alone, etched with stark finality. Blaine Morrison, 1990, 2024. No beloved husband, no devoted son. Just his name and the brutal truth that 34 years was not enough time, not nearly enough. I knelt beside the grave, the earth soft and cool under my knees, and placed the white lilies I'd brought, their petals trembling in the breeze. The same flowers I was holding when Nola's call shattered my world. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, tears falling freely, soaking into the soil. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to stay in your life. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead, and for a fleeting moment, I heard his voice, young and teasing. Mom, you worry too much. It was a memory from childhood, when he'd laugh at my fussing over scraped knees or bruised feelings. But it felt like a message now, a reassurance across the divide of death. I stayed for an hour, pouring out my heart, my regrets, my love, the truths I was only beginning to uncover, the questions I'd never have answers to. David Hartwell's office was a stark contrast to the cemetery's quiet grief, a small-town lawyer's domain of dark wood, leather chairs, and walls lined with law books that looked well-read, their spines cracked from years of use. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that softened the weight of his words. Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming, he said, his voice gentle but professional. In 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anything quite like this situation. Nola told me Blaine changed his will 3 months ago, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Yes, but it wasn't just the will, he said, pulling a thick file from his desk drawer. He hired a private investigator and left specific instructions for how his estate was to be handled. He was very thorough. He opened the file and extracted a sealed envelope, my name written across it in Blaine's familiar, careful handwriting. He left this for you. My hands shook as I took it, the paper feeling heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of all the years we'd lost. Would you like a few minutes to read it privately? He asked, his voice kind. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with emotion. He stepped out, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone with my son's final words. The letter was 4 pages long, written in blue ink on plain paper, Blaine's handwriting neat but rushed in places, as if he'd been racing against a clock, only he could see. Mom, it began, and I had to stop, wiping my eyes to clear the blur of tears. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and David has followed my instructions to make sure you get this letter. I don't know how much time I have left. The doctors aren't optimistic about the next surgery, but I need you to know the truth about what happened between us. 6 weeks ago, he'd hired a private investigator, driven by a nagging sense that something wasn't right. You disappeared from my life so gradually, Mom, that I almost didn't notice at first. But then I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in over a year. Every time I tried to call you, Nola said you were busy. Every time I suggested visiting, she had a reason why it wasn't a good time. When I asked her directly about it, She told me you'd said you wanted space, that you felt I was too dependent on you and needed to focus on my marriage. That hurt, Mom. But I believed it because I trusted her. I thought maybe you really did want distance, but it never felt right. You raised me by yourself after Dad left when I was 8. We were a team. You never made me feel like I was too much or too dependent. So I decided to find out what had really happened. The investigator's report was damning. A catalog of Nola's manipulations, intercepted phone calls, deleted emails, text messages sent from Blaine's phone without his knowledge, canceled plans he'd never been told about. I confronted her about it last week, he wrote. At first, she denied everything, but when I showed her the evidence, she broke down and admitted it. She said she felt like she was competing with you for my attention, that she needed to be the most important woman in my life. I told her that love doesn't work that way. You don't have to diminish one relationship to strengthen another. You taught me that, Mom, back when I was worried about dating in high school. You said the heart has infinite capacity for love, and the people who matter most want to see you happy, not isolated. He'd told Nola he couldn't forgive her, that she'd stolen years from us, years we could never reclaim. While you were thinking I didn't want you in my life anymore, I was thinking you'd outgrown needing me in yours. The truth is, I never stopped needing you. I never stopped wanting to hear your voice telling me I could handle whatever was worrying me. I never stopped missing our Sunday morning calls, where you'd update me on your garden and I'd tell you about work. I never stopped being proud to be your son. He left everything to me, the house, his savings, his life insurance, not out of obligation, but because I was his family, his real family, not because of blood, but because of love. Because you're the one who was there when I had nightmares, who taught me to drive, who came to every baseball game, even when you were working double shifts. He also gave me the power to decide Nola's fate. She doesn't know about the will yet. She thinks everything will come to her automatically. If you want to provide for her, you can. If you want to make sure she's taken care of, that's your choice. But if you want her to face the consequences of what she's done, that's your choice too. I know this puts a burden on you, Mom, but I trust your judgment more than anyone's. I know whatever you decide will come from a place of wisdom, not revenge. He ended with an apology that broke my heart anew. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I let her fool me for so long. I'm sorry I didn't trust my instincts sooner. I'm sorry I won't get to make it up to you in person. I love you. I've always loved you. Nothing Nola did could change that. Even when I didn't understand what was happening, you're the best mother I could have asked for. And I'm proud to be your son. Please don't let guilt eat at you. You did nothing wrong. You loved me the way mothers are supposed to love their children, completely, but not possessively. Nola's jealousy and manipulation are not your fault, and they're not mine either. Live your life, Mom. Be happy, and maybe sometimes, when you're working in your garden or making that terrible coffee you love so much, think of me and smile instead of crying. All my love, Blaine. A postscript added a final mystery. P.S. I hid a key to our safety deposit box in the old coffee can in your kitchen, the one you used for loose change when I was growing up. There's something in there I want you to have. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, but these were different from the tears I'd shed all week. These weren't tears of grief and confusion. They were tears of relief, of love, of a connection that had never truly been broken, despite Nola's efforts. Blaine had known the truth, had fought to reclaim our bond, even as his life slipped away. Soft piano music weaves through, tender and warm, evoking closure and enduring love. David returned, handing me a stack of documents. "Your son was very thorough," he said gently, settling back into his chair. "The private investigator's report is quite detailed. Phone records, email logs, even witness statements from friends and neighbors who noticed the pattern of canceled visits and changed plans." He pulled out another document. "The estate is substantial. The house worth approximately $300,000, a savings account with $180,000, and a life insurance policy worth $500,000. Everything comes to you. Nearly $1 million. Money Nola had likely been counting on, had perhaps already planned to spend." "There's also this," David said, handing me a smaller envelope. "Instructions for accessing the safety deposit box. Your son was very specific that you should visit it alone when you're ready." I thought of the key Blaine had mentioned, hidden in the coffee can where I'd saved quarters for his school lunches, a relic of our life together. "What are my legal obligations to Nola?" I asked, my voice steady now. "Legally? None," David said. "She has no claim to the estate. Blaine left her nothing, and Texas isn't a community property state for inheritances." He paused, leaning forward slightly. "But I should mention she's been calling the office every day since she found out about the will change. She's concerned about her financial situation. Concerned enough to admit what she'd done," I thought, picturing Nola in her kitchen, surrounded by papers, her carefully constructed world crumbling. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at her panic, but another part, the part that echoed Blaine's voice in his letter, wondered what he would want me to do. "I need some time to think," I said finally, gathering the documents. "To process all of this." "Of course," David said, handing me his card. "Take all the time you need. When you're ready to make decisions about the estate, call me." He hesitated, then added, "Your son spoke about you often when he was preparing these arrangements, Mrs. Morrison. He wanted you to know that none of this was your fault and that he never stopped loving you." I walked out of that office feeling like I carried Blaine's voice with me, not the distant, polite voice of our last conversations, but the voice of the boy who'd called me his best friend, who'd held my hand crossing the street and told me he loved me every night before bed. There was one more stop I needed to make. Not the bank, not yet, but home, to the coffee can in my kitchen. I needed to hold whatever piece of my son was waiting for me there. Act 5. The Roots of Betrayal. At home, I found the old Maxwell House coffee can exactly where it had sat for 15 years, tucked on the top shelf of my kitchen pantry, behind the flour and sugar, a relic from when Blaine was in high school, and I'd save loose change for his baseball tournament fees and pizza money. It was heavier than I remembered, and when I shook it gently, I heard the jingle of coins mixed with something else, something that didn't sound metallic. My hands trembled as I pried off the plastic lid, peering inside. Quarters, dimes, and nickels filled the bottom, just as they always had, but nestled among them was a small brass key and something wrapped in tissue paper. I pulled out the tissue paper first, unfolding it carefully, my breath catching as I revealed a small silver bracelet, the one I'd given Blaine for his 16th birthday, engraved on the inside with my son, my pride, my joy. He'd worn it every day through high school, then college, a quiet token of our bond, but I hadn't seen it in years. I'd assumed he'd outgrown it or lost it. He'd kept it, I realized, tears welling in my eyes. All this time, even as Nola poisoned him against me, he'd held on to this piece of us. The key was small, clearly for a safety deposit box, with a tiny tag attached bearing an address downtown and a number, 247, the same as his grave plot. The coincidence, or perhaps it was intentional, sent a shiver down my spine. Blaine had planned this carefully, even in his final months, weaving a trail for me to follow, a path to the truth. I sat at my kitchen table, holding the bracelet, its cool metal warming in my palm, when the phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Nola's name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But something, curiosity perhaps, or a need to understand, compelled me to answer. "Hello? Opal. Thank God you answered," Nola said, her voice raw, different from the panic of our last call. This was closer to resignation, a woman standing at the edge of her own ruin. "Please, I need to see you again. There are things I didn't tell you yesterday. Important things about why I did what I did." I looked at the bracelet, at the key that promised one final message from my son. Part of me wanted to hang up, to focus on Blaine's legacy instead of Nola's excuses. But another part needed to understand, not for her sake, but for his. "I'll come over," I said, my voice firm. "But this is the last time, Nola. After today, I don't want to see you again unless it's through lawyers." "I understand," she said, her voice small. "Thank you." An hour later, I sat in her living room. The space eerily familiar, yet alien. A stage where so much of my pain had been scripted. Nola had cleaned up the scattered papers, made an effort to look presentable, her hair brushed, her clothes pressed, but the effort only highlighted her fragility. She served coffee in delicate porcelain cups, as if formality could atone for years of deception, her hands still trembling as she poured. "I need to start from the beginning," she said, settling across from me, her eyes fixed on her cup as if it held the courage she needed. "From before Blaine and I even met." She took a shaky breath, her voice low. "I was engaged before, to a man named Marcus. We'd been together for 3 years, planning our wedding, building a life together. His mother hated me from the moment we met." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine briefly before darting away. She thought I wasn't good enough for him. Wrong social class, wrong family background, wrong everything. She did everything she could to break us up, whispering doubts in his ear, sabotaging our plans, making me feel like an intruder in his life. I waited, sensing where this story was headed, a flicker of unwanted sympathy stirring despite my anger. "She succeeded," Nola said, her voice breaking. "Marcus chose her over me. He canceled our wedding 3 weeks before the date because his mother convinced him I was only after his money, that I didn't really love him. It destroyed me, Opal. When I met Blaine, I swore I'd never let another mother come between me and the man I loved. So you decided to eliminate me as a threat," I said, my voice flat, cutting through her narrative. "I decided to protect my marriage," she corrected, standing abruptly and pacing to the window, her movements restless. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about protection and became about control. I liked being the only woman in Blaine's life. I liked that he turned to me for everything, that I was his world, even when you could see it was hurting him," I said, my voice low, a quiet accusation. "That's the thing, Opal," she said, turning to face me, her eyes red again. "I convinced myself it wasn't hurting him. Every canceled visit, every intercepted call, every lie. I told myself I was saving him from disappointment. I told myself you were getting older, that you had your own life, that maybe you really didn't want to be bothered with us anymore." She sat back down, her shoulders slumping, as if the weight of her own words was too much to bear. "I made myself believe my own lies until these last few months, when Blaine started asking questions I couldn't answer." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The investigator's report didn't just document what I'd done. It documented how it affected both of you. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for something, understanding perhaps, or absolution. Your phone records showed dozens of calls to our house that went unanswered, emails you sent that I deleted before Blaine could see them, birthday cards, and Christmas gifts that I intercepted and threw away. Her voice broke, and I felt a chill as memories surfaced. Cards I'd carefully chosen, gifts I'd wrapped with love, all vanished without a trace. There's more, she continued, her voice barely audible. The investigator found out about your medical records. I froze, my breath catching. What medical records? Last year, when you had that emergency appendectomy, she said, looking directly at me now. You were in the hospital for 4 days? My blood ran cold. I remembered that stay vividly. The sudden, terrifying pain, the rushed surgery, the long, lonely recovery. I'd been alone the entire time, convinced Blaine didn't want to be bothered with his mother's health problems. You listed Blaine as your emergency contact, Nola said. The hospital called him. I felt the room spin, the edges blurring. What? I whispered. I told him you were fine, she said, her voice a confession, each word a wound. I told him you'd specifically asked not to be disturbed, that you had friends taking care of you and didn't want him to worry. He wanted to come, Opal. He was in his car, driving to the hospital, when I called him back and told him you'd been discharged and were resting comfortably at home with your friend Margaret. I thought of those 4 days in the hospital, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would notice if I didn't make it through. I'd convinced myself that was what independence looked like, handling everything alone because my grown son had his own life to live. He wanted to come, I repeated, more to myself than to her. The words a lifeline in the sea of her lies. Every time, she said, tears streaming down her face. Every single time something happened to you, he wanted to be there. The time you fell and sprained your ankle, when your car broke down on the highway, when you had that bout of pneumonia 2 winters ago. He wanted to help, but I convinced him you didn't want him to. I told him it would embarrass you, that you'd said you didn't want him to see you sick or vulnerable. The room felt like it was closing in, the air too thick to breathe. All those times I'd struggled alone, thinking my son didn't care. He'd been kept away by her lies, manipulated into believing I'd pushed him away. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and grief. Because yesterday, when I saw the panic in your eyes, the pain of not knowing where he was buried, I realized something, she said, wiping her face with a tissue. I didn't just steal him from you. I stole you from him too. And in the end, I lost him, anyway. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The night before he went into the hospital for his final surgery, she said, her voice breaking. He told me he was going to leave me. He said he couldn't stay married to someone who'd kept him from his mother for years. He said he was going to call you after the surgery and tell you everything. I closed my eyes, imagining that conversation we'd never have, the words he'd wanted to say, the bridge he'd tried to rebuild. He died thinking I was a monster, Nola said, her voice raw with self-loathing. And he was right. She looked at me with something approaching desperation. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, Opal, but I need you to know I loved him. I really did love him. I just loved him wrong. I stood, suddenly needing to be anywhere but in this house, this shrine to lies and broken dreams. Where are you going? Nola asked, her voice rising with panic. To the bank, I said, my voice steady now. to see what else my son wanted me to know. She followed me to the door, her steps hurried. Opal, wait. The will? The inheritance? I know I don't deserve anything, but the house, Blaine's savings. I don't know how I'm going to. I turned to face her, cutting her off. I haven't decided anything yet, I said, my voice cold but calm. But I will tell you this. Whatever I decide, it won't be because you asked for my pity. It'll be because of what Blaine would have wanted. And what do you think he would have wanted? She asked, her voice small, almost childlike. I thought of my son, the man who'd hired a private investigator to uncover the truth, who'd changed his will to ensure I knew how much he loved me, but who'd also given me the power to decide his wife's fate. I think he would have wanted justice, I said, my voice steady. But I also think he would have wanted mercy. I just don't know which one you deserve. I opened the door, stepping into the sunlight, leaving her standing in the shadow of her own choices. Act 6, the safety deposit box and the choice. The safety deposit box was in the basement of First National Bank, in a quiet room lined with small metal doors, each guarding its own secrets. The clerk led me to box 247, the same number as Blaine's grave, a detail that felt like his hand guiding me still, and left me alone with whatever my son had deemed important enough to hide away. My hands trembled as I inserted the brass key, the lock clicking open with a soft, final sound. Inside was a manila envelope and a small velvet jewelry box, their simplicity belying the weight they carried. I opened the envelope first, my breath catching as I found 3 letters, each addressed to me in Blaine's handwriting, dated across the last 2 years. He'd been writing to me, pouring out his heart in letters he'd never sent, a silent rebellion against Nola's control. The first, from 18 months ago, was raw with confusion and hurt. I don't understand what happened between us, Mom. I keep trying to figure out what I did wrong, but I can't remember any fight, any moment when things changed. The second, from 8 months ago, showed growing suspicion. Something's not right. Nola always has an excuse when I want to call you, always a reason we can't visit. I'm starting to think she's lying to me about something. The third, dated just 6 weeks ago, around the time he'd hired the investigator, was resolute. I'm going to find out the truth, Mom. If she's been keeping us apart, I'm going to fix this. I miss you more than I can say. I opened the velvet box with tears streaming down my face, my fingers trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside was my mother's ring, the one I'd given Blaine when he got engaged, telling him to save it for his first daughter. He'd saved it for me instead, a symbol of our unbroken bond. A note was tucked beneath it, written in his careful hand. This belongs with you, where it always belonged. Love, your son. I slipped the ring onto my finger, its familiar weight grounding me, and sat in that quiet bank vault, surrounded by my son's love letters and the proof that our bond had never truly been broken, despite Nola's relentless efforts. She'd built walls between us, but she hadn't destroyed what we had. Now, I faced a choice. What to do with the power Blaine had left me, the power to rebuild or to punish, to show mercy or to demand justice. For 3 days, I wrestled with that choice, reading and rereading Blaine's letters, wearing my mother's ring, trying to separate my anger from my love for my son. On the 4th day, I called David Hartwell and scheduled a meeting with him and Nola. She arrived at the lawyer's office looking like she hadn't slept in weeks, her clothes wrinkled, her hair unwashed, clutching a tissue box like a lifeline. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, but I held up a hand, signaling her to sit. Mrs. Morrison has made her decision regarding the distribution of Blaine's assets. David said, his voice professional but kind, pulling out the estate documents. I looked at Nola, meeting her gaze directly. "I've decided to give you the house," I said quietly. Her eyes widened in shock, her breath catching. "What?" "The house is yours, free and clear," I said. "But that's all. The savings account and life insurance money will go into a foundation in Blaine's name, supporting programs that help children maintain relationships with their grandparents after divorce or family conflict." Nola blinked rapidly, trying to process my words, her hands trembling. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because Blaine wouldn't have wanted you to be homeless," I said, my voice steady. "But he also wouldn't have wanted you to profit from the pain you caused." I pulled out one of his letters, unfolding it carefully, and read aloud. "The heart has infinite capacity for love, and the people who matter most want to see you happy, not isolated." I looked at her, my eyes unflinching. I taught him that when he was 17, worried about dating his first girlfriend. He never forgot it. Nola was sobbing now, quiet tears that seemed to come from a place deep and broken inside her. "I don't deserve this kindness," she said, her voice raw. "No," I agreed, my voice calm but unyielding. "You don't. But my son did, and this is what he would have wanted." David cleared his throat, sliding a document across the table. "There are conditions to this arrangement," he said, glancing at Nola. "You'll sign a statement acknowledging what you did," I said, my voice firm. "Full disclosure of how you manipulated both Blaine and me, how you intercepted communications, fabricated excuses, and kept us apart. It won't be made public unless you ever try to contact me again or spread lies about our family." Nola nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. You'll also attend counseling," I continued. "Real counseling, not just a few sessions to check a box. You need to understand why you did what you did, so you never do it to anyone else." She nodded again, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "And one more thing," I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out a small photo album I'd put together over the past few days. "These are pictures of Blaine growing up, his first steps, his high school graduation, his college years. All the moments you never saw because you were too busy trying to erase me from his life." I slid it across the table to her. "I want you to look at these and understand what you destroyed, not just my relationship with him, but his relationship with his own history. Every story about his childhood he couldn't share with you because it involved me. Every family tradition that died because you cut us off from each other." Nola opened the album with trembling hands, staring at a picture of 5-year-old Blaine, his face smeared with birthday cake frosting, grinning at the camera with unbridled joy. "This is the son you married," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "The man he became because he was raised with love, not manipulation. Because he was taught that family means supporting each other, not controlling each other." She turned the page, finding a photo of teenage Blaine and me at his high school graduation, both of us beaming with pride, his arm around my shoulders. "He was so excited that day," I said, my voice catching with the memory. "He told everyone his mom was his hero because I'd worked 2 jobs to put him through school. He said I was the strongest person he knew." "He said that about me, too," Nola whispered, her voice barely audible. "After we got married, he said I was strong for building my own career, for knowing what I wanted." "Then why wasn't that enough?" I asked, my voice quiet but piercing. "Why did you need to be the only strong woman in his life?" She stared at the photo for a long time, her fingers tracing Blaine's face, before answering. Because I was terrified of losing him the way I lost Marcus, she said, her voice breaking. But I realize now that I lost him anyway. I lost him more slowly, one lie at a time. David handed her the documents to sign, and as she worked through the paperwork, acknowledging her deception and agreeing to the conditions of inheriting the house, I felt something unexpected. Peace. This wasn't revenge. Revenge would have left her homeless, destitute, cast out into the cold. This wasn't forgiveness either. Forgiveness would come later, if it came at all. This was justice, tempered by the compassion Blaine had always shown, even to those who didn't deserve it. When the papers were signed, Nola looked up at me one last time, her eyes red and swollen. "Will you tell me about him?" she asked quietly. "About what he was like as a little boy. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'd like to understand who he was before I met him." I hesitated, my instinct to refuse, to withhold the stories she'd stolen from me. Why should I give her any part of Blaine's past after she'd robbed me of his present? But then I remembered something he'd written in one of his unsent letters. "I wish I could tell Nola about the time you taught me to drive in the church parking lot, or how you used to sing Beatles songs while you cooked dinner. I wish she understood that loving you didn't mean loving her less." "He was curious about everything," I said finally, my voice soft with memory. "Even as a toddler, he had to know how things worked. He took apart our toaster when he was 4 because he wanted to see where the toast went." A small, tearful smile crossed Nola's face. "He still did that," she said, her voice trembling. "Always tinkering with things, trying to fix them or make them better. He got that from his grandfather," I said, picturing my father, an engineer with the same restless curiosity. My dad was always building something, and Blaine would watch him for hours, asking a million questions. Nola clutched the photo album, her knuckles white. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For this, for the house, for the pictures, for not destroying me the way I deserved." "Don't thank me," I said, standing and closing my purse. "Thank Blaine. This is his mercy, not mine." Act 7, The Legacy of Love. 6 months later, I received an unexpected package in the mail, its return address bearing Nola's name. Inside was a framed photo of Blaine I'd never seen before, taken when he was about 30, standing in a garden, laughing at something off camera, his eyes bright with the joy I remembered from his childhood. On the back was a note in Nola's careful handwriting. I found this in his desk drawer. He kept it next to his computer at work. "I thought you should have it. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. I'm learning." I placed the photo on my mantel, beside the others. Blaine, at 5, covered in cake. At 18, graduating high school. At 26, on his wedding day. The foundation we'd established in Blaine's name had already helped dozens of families rebuild connections damaged by manipulation or misunderstanding. Its quarterly reports a reminder that his death, while tragic, had birthed something meaningful, a legacy of healing. But the real healing came on quiet Sunday mornings, when I worked in my garden, wearing my mother's ring, the silver bracelet tucked safely in my jewelry box. I thought of Blaine, not the years we'd lost, but the love that had survived Nola's lies, a love that shone through his letters, his will, and the choices he'd entrusted to me. He'd come home to me after all, not in person, but in the truth he'd fought to uncover, in the foundation bearing his name, in the peace he'd given me to choose mercy over revenge. Some bonds, I'd learned, are stronger than lies. Some love is bigger than loss. And sometimes, the greatest gift a child can give a parent is proof that they never stopped believing in the relationship that shaped them, even when it seemed broken beyond repair. I still missed Blaine every day, and I always would. But thanks to his final gift, the truth about what had happened between us, I could remember him the way he'd wanted to be remembered, as my son, my pride, my joy, and my greatest teacher about what love could endure. That was enough. That was everything. Now I'm curious about you, who've walked this journey with me. What would you do in my place? Have you ever fought to reclaim a connection stolen by lies, or faced a choice between justice and mercy? Comment below with your thoughts and the city you're listening from. I'd love to know where this story has reached you. Check out 2 other stories on the final screen. They're channel favorites, and will surprise you with their twists and heart. Thank you for staying until the end, for sharing this moment with me. Until next time, keep holding on to the bonds that matter most.